Welcome to another episode of the Tasmeem Doha 2024 podcast. As you know, the theme is under construction. Our guest today is Mirna Bamieh, who's going to be leading a workshop on March 3rd and March 4th entitled Sour Things, the Workshop. Mirna Bamieh is an artist and is behind the incredible initiative entitled Palestine Hosting Society. Mirna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really nice to talk to you, Mickey, about the sour things.
Of course. No, it's great to talk to you as well. I want to just discuss first this idea of fermentation, because I think that's like a larger theme. I think you'd agree that that's a larger theme for the workshop. And so maybe can you give us a sense of what attracted you to this idea of fermentation? What place does it hold in our culture and society, and why it made sense as an idea that you wanted to unpack and give people an opportunity to focus on?
As a mere introduction, I started Palestine Hosting Society in 2018, and it's a food research project on the recipes in Palestine that are disappearing, but not only the recipes, the stories around them, and the practices, food practices in general in Palestine and diaspora Palestine, and all the links and bridges from Palestine to the world through the lens of food. I activate that archive through dinner performances, walks, and different interventions. But then food really dictated my first, because I was an artist and making art even before the food project. Once I started the food project, my studio turned into, the kitchen turned into my studio. And I think we all went through that shift in the way we deal with our surroundings during COVID. And we thought deeper about what we want from the world and what we want to say, and mostly how important communities are in moments of uncertainty. And for me, food has been a major actor throughout all my life, thinking through food, even before Palestine Hosting Society. But once I was able to look at life through the lens of food, I realized that it's endless. During COVID, I was more serious about fermentation and practices of preservation. As you know, the Mune or the pantry space is the space where families build sustainability for an uncertain future. A long time ago, produce was not as available as it is now. So we had to be more connected to the land and the cycles and seasons. And the pantry was the space that reflected all that. And when we talk about the pantry, we talk about grains, we talk about flour, sugar, salt, but as well ferments, which and drying produce as well, whether meat or vegetables. This act of preservation and prolonging the life of things is fascinating for me. And then I realized that I'm able to have that intimacy in the way I deal with food reflected through fermentation and looking at the jar of the bacteria. So it was my way back into the studio, beyond the kitchen as a studio. So in 2020, during COVID, I was fermenting a lot. I was writing a lot. I was researching practices of preservation in our region, but as well in the world. And that started a series of installations with sour things and beyond.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you a really simple question. If you were to try to explain to like a 15-year-old who has never seen a fermentation happen, right? Or doesn't know that they've seen it, can you kind of explain what the process is like?
I would start by telling him that there are organisms that we cannot see with our eye, and they are everywhere, and even on the skin, on the vegetable. And when we understand, understand how to prolong, because kids love pickles. They love cucumber pickles. And I noticed that with my nephew, they really like this salty
Hmm.
flavor. And once you bring them a fresh cucumber and a pickled cucumber, and you tell them they are the same, but time happened and fermentation happened, and humans learned how to use the bacteria that lives on the skin of cucumber to transform it and have a longer cycle by using salt. And salt is a preservation material that helps us in this process. And when we mix water and salt, we create this house for this cucumber to live longer and to have this sourness and saltiness that takes it from fresh to pickled
Yeah.
or fermented. So it's just for me, if I want to explain it to 15, actually, I was thinking of a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Then it's all about you creating the right environment for those bacteria, organisms that we cannot see with our eye, and to have that transformation happen
Yeah.
through salt and water.
It's funny. I was reading online about this series, Sour Things, and you were talking about the disappearance of the pantry. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like when it happened, why it happened?
I mean, and basically, it happened because of the Industrial Revolution and the availability of produce and this rupture with our connection to seasonality and the land. Tomatoes are available throughout the year. We don't need to dry them. When we dry them, it's because we want the taste, not because we are missing on the availability of tomatoes. Movement as well. Moving from one place to the other is easier. People needed to travel to get to go to the nearest shop before. Now you don't really think about movement in relation to accessibility of food. But as well, we're talking about days where you cannot leave the house because it's too hot or too cold. And you want to rely on what you have in the house. We're talking about times when it was not as safe to be outside every single day. So it's a lot of things that made the pantry space not disappear, but shrink to a shelf in the kitchen. But what disappeared is the appreciation and the necessity and the urgency of having the pantry space as part of our house design.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
But with that, like certain stories disappear and the connections disappear.
Can you describe like a typical pantry that you think your great great grandparents had or great great grandmother grandfather had, and what that sort of looked like?
Um, I don't know if you know Namliye. You know Namliye?
No.
And Namliye is this wood structure, cupboard design that is reserved for all the jars and the sugar and the things that you put. It's usually quite big and it has shelves and drawers. That is usually in at a junction of the kitchen, or it's in its own space. Uh, so that would be one, the namliye. And my teta had that in her kitchen. I only know my maternal grandma in Beirut, and she's the one who would always make jams and ferments in the season, the kishik as well, and I remember very vividly how she used to put this layer of wax on top of the jams and marmalades, so they're preserved for the whole year, and she does not need to put it in the fridge. Like when you talk about fermentation and the pantry, you need to remember that the fridge is quite new in our houses, and we needed to come up with a way of preserving food outside outside, like the cool and the hot weather.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Okay, I want to ask you about the workshop a little more. If somebody's reading the description for the workshop, there's a film that you screen at the beginning that you describe as being a tone guide for the workshop. And the film is a 20-minute film that you created called To Jar. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind that, how you birthed that film?
So in 2019, I had a 3-year project with a museum in Warsaw, Justowski. And it was there where I was more serious about fermentation as part of my practice in art and not my practice in life, the daily life. And then I started writing. The museum built a kitchen for me, and the museum, it was a space. It was a kitchen lab, fermentation lab. And I was collecting and researching recipes in East Europe, and going to villages and collecting all that knowledge, and then reflecting on our culture and the preservation practices that we have in the Middle East. And I started writing while the kitchen was being prepared for me. And I had different interventions in 2019 and 20 and 21 with the museum, but then the writing was the first one. And during COVID in 2020, I found myself reflecting deeper and deeper into fermentation and the body of the jar, and connecting it to my own body and the cycles of the fermentation that's happening inside the jar, and as well reflecting that on what's happening in my life. And it was one text that I was writing during COVID that became the text of the video. And then during 2020 as well, I filmed it in August in Warsaw. And it had that tone, it had that mellow pace that's very specific to that period. And trying to stretch this lens of looking at bacteria and learning from them to understand how can we build communities in moments of disaster uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that's basically the approach of this video.
Yeah. And the text is, when life gives you lemons over and over again.
No, that was the base text for Sour
Oh,
Cities.
so what is the text for?
The listening session that we will have during the workshop? The text for the video for To Jar is inside the jar fermenting.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because, like, in some ways, like when you describe it as a tone guide, the tone that it seems to set is a sad tone for me. Yes, I mean, for sure, the process of fermentation is a process of almost elongating the life of this food, right? And sort of transforming into this, metamorphosizing into this other state that can exist for longer and can help feed us at different times, right? But the subtext is, we're going to need this in times of crisis. We're going to need this food when there is no food, in times of disaster, which is to say, we expect times of disaster. We need to prepare for them because they will come.
Yeah, they will come.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this video was created during COVID, and we all felt it on our skin, We were not so sure how the future would look like. And we felt that, okay, we need to pay the bill for what we did on Earth, and climate is changing, and life as we know it might not be the case anymore. We even thought that we will not be able to fly anymore. But it's not a sad tone. I think the video has a humbling tone. It's this time when I think we were all humbled, and we realized that we are not the strongest. There are, like, nature, what revolves is more powerful than any technology that we created can have. So yeah, I think it's a humble tone more than a sad tone.
Yeah.
But as well, it's when you look at bacteria and when you look of our bodies being bacteria cells more than human cells, you cannot not be humble, and you want to learn more about the world, and you want to not look at the grand scheme of things, but really like focus and zoom in to things that are dictating everything in life, but you cannot capture them with your gaze.
What do you hope that people take away from this when you lead workshops like this all over the world, and in particular when you're going to lead this for Doha?
So the workshop part of Sour Things, it comes under the umbrella of Sour Things, which are several installations that are in the making. One of them was the kitchen. The other one was the pantry that was opened recently. There was the market, Sour Things, the market with Sharjah. And then the workshop was to activate all those spaces and to lead the audiences into tuning in to this sensibility of looking inwards, but as well look at the space of the jar as an alive jar, and be guided through questions that will facilitate that. The workshop as well, it has a listening session, as I mentioned, which is actually a soundscape that I collaborated on with Isaac Sullivan. And it as well has that attunement in the way it was dealing with cities and the sourness that are left on the body while moving in between cities. So somehow the workshop of sour things make you understand the way that I deal with sour things installation. There are many mediums in the installations. There's the sound aspect, the ceramic aspect, the space design aspect, the drawing aspect, the ferment aspect. There's so many mediums that I work with, but somehow they all have in common this attunement to listening to things that might pass you if you were not alert. So what I try to do in the design of Sour Things, the workshop, is somehow to fine-tune this attention through the questions and the listening, but as well the making, because we will be making a ferment together, which is a lemon ferment with spices.
How long does it take?
The workshop? It's 2 hours.
The fermentation process. How long does it take to create the ferment?
2 hours, because there are, as you said, there's the film, there's the sound, there's the making, and there's the questions, and then there's a meal to share, like simple things where you can taste the freshly made mixture before it ferments. So you taste it when it's fresh and it's super delicious, but then you take a jar back home and you open it after a month, and you keep inscribing how the taste is changing throughout that process. And it's a ferment that lives for years and years, for 5 years, even longer. I mean, people are going with a small jar, so I don't know if they will not eat it in 5 years, but I mean, they will have the recipe, and then they can make it. And for fermented lemons, the longer the time passes on them, the more complex the flavor. Which I find beautiful. It's really hard for this ferment to rot.
Can you talk a little bit about the connected nature of food in your practice and storytelling, and talk about how you try to think about those two things in your work, let's say within the framework of the Palestine Hosting Society, or even within the framework of this broader project, the broader project of Sour Things?
So one line of songs that has been dictating my practice since I started making art, with the first video that I made in 2009, was disappearance. I think part of me was dealing with disappearance since I started, even before I realized that I was having this obsession about wanting to understand disappearance. And what does it mean for memory to disappear, for the body to disappear, for the land to disappear, for yourself to be rendered invisible? And I was trying to process that because I'm trained as a video artist, and I was dealing with that through videos and video installations. And then later on with the food, the disappearance of recipes. One way for me to have food as a medium in my practice was because I needed a medium that is closer to people. As an artist with the video practice, my studio was the laptop, and I was always a traveling artist. So there was kind of a loneliness in the practice. And after from 2009 to 2018, that was quite a long time. I was dealing with things that are related to my own being and my own identity and my own body and my own face. And other videos that were dealing with memory in relation and deconstructing it from my own view of things. So somehow I missed the stories of others in my practice, and food was always something very important in my life and the life of my family as well. So I went to culinary school as a break to think through things. And then I realized that actually there are so many recipes that I did not know about as a Palestinian. And I wanted to understand why do I not know them? Why did I not grow up eating those dishes? Why are there certain ingredients that are not accessible anymore? And that really fascinated me, but it was an amazing learning space. So I started collecting those recipes and sharing them with people through dinner performances. And then the dinner performances kept getting more and more elaborate. And I started adding the ceramic design aspect. I started thinking about sharing, because when we talk about food in our region, sharing and those spaces of gathering are as important as the food that you eat. So for me, creating those tables and those active spaces of listening in the performance were my way of bringing life and highlighting those recipes and the stories of the people that were teaching me those recipes as well. And as I said before, there was this moment where I missed the studio as a studio without, having that connection to the people. And I was trying to create that balance. But somehow for me, fermentation was that gateway. It made me able to write and to understand myself more, and somehow open worlds that were invisible for me, basically. And I love sourness and I love salt, and those are two huge worlds that I'm still exploring through sour things.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of especially with sour things, this idea of permanence versus erasure, right? Trying to keep things alive through sort of transformation, and the idea of fighting decay and fighting erasure. Thinking about those themes within the backdrop of what's happening in Palestine today, but also what has happened in Palestine for the last 100 years, is hard to not see the connection so bluntly. And that it's within that context, the meaning of what you're doing takes on a new form. Are you trying to have people also understand it within the context of Palestine? This idea of fighting erasure and fighting decay through cultural preservation?
I don't want to call it fighting, because as a fermentation practitioner, you do not fight. You just have the right tools that make you be able to reach what you want, and then leave it. There's this kind of letting go that's very important and so powerful as well. For the fermentation, I think it's the preservation aspect, and I deal a lot with that in the pantry piece that I just Sour Things the Pantry, because this whole piece started. I actually was supposed to be part of that show with Sour Things the Kitchen, but when the war started, I kept having those images of certain things in relation to the pantry, and then I was commissioned this piece by the museum, and I was able to realize it, and I was working. It was the space where I was channeling all those all this pain, but all this helplessness, because I was at Palestine. When the war broke, I was there for a month, and I wanted to see my family. I have not seen them for a while. And then we were all part of this rupture of the war. And then I had to leave. And then I was leaving my kitchen. I was leaving my pantry space again, not knowing when I'll be back. And I was thinking of preservation, and how can you practice preservation when you have no pantry space, when you're uprooted, when you're displaced. And those notions were very urgent in that situation, where many people are being, again, uprooted from their houses and from and at that time, it was not like the hunger and not having accessibility to food was not even there yet. I was thinking mostly about uprooting and how the displaced, how the immigrants create that preservation. So the pantry space had that aspect to it. Especially that as Palestinians, we constantly have to reinvent to reinvent our sense of space, our sense of belonging, our sense of identity, our sense of creating a daily structure that makes us stay, that makes us not disappear. And that's a lot when you have to do that, not one generation, but generation after generation and after generation. And when you think you have some control over things, your whole reality shifts again, and you have to do new definitions, and you can never take anything for granted. And I think the pantry space is that space that never makes you take things for granted. There's always that uncertainty in the future, and that's the starting point for the pantry, but as well, that's the starting point on us constantly having to create this identity. And with the war, we see that Palestinianness is not location. It's not Palestine. Palestinianness can happen everywhere to everyone. It's somehow the liberation of Palestine is now connected with the liberation of people all over the world. And for that, there's new definitions that are still happening, and we have to live through.
No, it's so true. Yeah, like the jars of cucumbers, the workshop itself, the actual idea is also taking new shapes and sort of.
Especially that it would be the first time where I'll be not there making the workshop. I'm in Lisbon now, and I'm not able to leave Europe until my papers are sorted. So I'm dictated by that as well. So somehow we're stretching not only the life, but we're stretching the table from Doha to Lisbon, and we're fermenting through the distance. And I think that's an interesting experience for me, because I've never done it before, but I'm sure it have its own beauty.
It's a metaphor. How has your relationship to the Pantry changed since you started working on this, since COVID?
Since COVID.
Like now, when you see Mune, when you see these types of things, do you look at things in a new way?
Definitely. I mean, I realized that you can ferment everything. You just need to know how. I had this deep appreciation to salt as well. And um, I had just moved to a new place, and the first thing that I bought for the place were the fermentation jars. Um, they were the first thing for me. It's setting place. It's arrival. And the first thing that I'm doing in this new place in Lisbon is fermenting the cabbage. So it's all those recipes. It's for me. It's making home. Um, the visual of the jars is very important for me, and I think I use that a lot in the installations that I make. What is edible, what is not edible after the show, and the moment of opening the jars. But as well, I'm fascinated by the cultural aspect of fermentation, things that we think that everybody loves because we love it like Jamint. It's not the case for everyone in the world. There are very cultural and specific ferments that somehow only if you grew up eating, you will like them. Like natto, for instance, for the Japanese, and other ferments that are quite funky that we sometimes say, how can you eat this? Because, it really plays on this very fine line of decay and aliveness that somehow only if you grew up eating, you will be able to enjoy it and missing and create that memory around. So for me, that line of fermentation and decay as a taste is fascinating for me.
So what else are you working on these days?
I'm working on bitter things.
So tell us a little bit about that.
I'm working on bitter things. It's a new installation that will be opened on the 26th of April with TBA 21 and C3A in Andalusia and Madrid. I'm working with the bitter orange. It's a heirloom orange, and somehow it's naranj, it's the hushtash, it's busfet. So we know it, and we have those memories around them. But somehow this tree became a decoration tree in many, especially in Andalusia, where we're working on the research of this project. And I'm connecting the bitterness of this orange with the sweetness of the Shamolti oranges from Jaffa. And I'm connecting all those two things with my biography, and especially my father's biography, because he's from Jaffa as well. And family histories and interrupted biographies, and so it's quite an exciting installation. We've been processing hundreds and hundreds of kilos of bitter oranges in Cordoba for the installation, and it was a beautiful exchange of recipes. They do not know how to do the juice concentrate, and now they're fascinated by this drink. I learned how they make the bitter orange marmalade, which is quite different than my grandma's recipe. And then it was, like this exchange of recipes and making and processing those hundreds of kilos that will eventually be part of the installation that will be open there and for a whole year for people. It's another kitchen. So I did sour things, the kitchen, and now there will be another kitchen for bitter things. And then there will be other iterations for bitter things, not only with oranges, but other bitter things.
Very cool. How is this all related to Palestine Hosting Society? Do you feel like they are related?
And they are related because I'm the one behind.
Yeah.
So I'm the link. And they're all related to food and the stories of people. Maybe Palestine Hosting Society was more connected to the collective, and bringing the story of the dishes of Palestine to the world through the dinner performances. Now I'm looking more at, I'm tuning in, like the stories to the produce, to the lemon, to the citrus, to the orange, to the olive. So I'm taking that starting point of the vegetable or the citrus or the fruit, and they're all living together. I'm taking a slight break from performing, from the dinner performances. I think it's a moment for me to invest more in my installation practice until I am able to perform again, because it needs another kind of mentality and another way. It needs a certain hopefulness that unfortunately I lack now, I can say.
Yeah. Do you expect the hopefulness to come back at some point?
I mean, I'm cultivating it through sour things and bitter things.
Yeah.
So slowly.
Yeah.
Because it has all that celebration, and you need to be very strong to be able to celebrate life amidst death. And I am not that strong yet to do that.
Yeah, it's like it's close to impossible to even maintain a sense of hope, let alone hopefulness,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we need to keep going, and we keep doing, and we need our voices are what makes us visible, and we need to always remember that. For me, my voice is by making art. That has always my way of living. It has always been the air that I breathe, even when I was, still at school. So for me to process pain and to try to understand was always through the lens of art. So for me, it's just keep creating that, and not to stop. Maybe not through performances, but through other mediums. Clay and working with ceramics has been very important for me. Drawing as well. I have not been able to draw for 20 years. And all of a sudden with the war, I was able to draw again. So I think it's a blessing that we need always to remember as creatives and artists that we can at least have those tools to process. And there is a reason, and there is a force to that. And not doing anything is just being passive, which is it's not my word. Just
Do you feel like what you're doing is a sort of a form of resistance, a form of activism? Do you feel that? Do you think that those are things that the words you would use to describe your practice?
I was asked that question many times with the Palestine Hosting Society, and personally, I do not think it's activism in the classic sense of activism, just because of the tonality. The tonality of activism has always been bombarding, and the way that I'm saying what I want to say has a different tonality. It's more the female way of resistance, let's say, which is creating space, which is opening spaces of listening and sharing. And I think activism has all that, like a very high tonality, even bombarding images to it. I don't see myself that person, but what I do is definitely resistance for my own self as a start. As I said, all the projects that I do are learning spaces that I create for myself in my practice. And for me, that's one way of making life for myself and knowing or trying to find ways of saying what I want to say and learning what I want to say as well. But then with the Palestine Hosting Society, it's all about the others and the other people and their stories and their recipes that I'm learning and sharing with the world. So there's definitely that aspect of 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 making those recipes visible again and eaten again and part of the bodies of the people that are eating them during the performance, which which is resistance somehow. Um, they will never be able, and I've done dinner performances all over the world,
Mm.
and I had people who would not have been able to digest those stories if they were not created in that setting. So for me, that's a win, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm creating this recipe, this project, and sharing those dinners.
Amazing. So Mirna, let me just tell people a little more. If you'd like to attend the workshops, they are going to be on, I believe, March 3rd and March 4th. The workshop is called Sour Things, the Workshop. You can find out more by going to tasmeem.qatar.vcu.edu, or just look up Tasmeem Doha on Instagram and you'll see all the information. Mirna, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure sharing more about sour things.